Some come to stay, some gone in a day, some fly far away, some cry in dismay, some row, 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 some go with the flow, some near, some dear, some just disappear. Win some, lose some, always stay forever in the mystery of you.
Hi, welcome to Pandamix, Healing Conversations and Practices for In-Between Times. I'm the Reverend Lang, and this is Dr. Home. Episode 2 is Hurt People, Hurt People. Hurt people, hurt people. How we need to and why it is important to feel into our own sorrow and rage.
Mm-hmm. We will also use this time to share the importance of storytelling, why storytelling can be healing for ourselves and then also for each other.
Yes, storytelling and story listening as well.
Yes.
Our own and others. And this very much came about after George Floyd's murder, which so many of us watch on television. And then in the following days and conversations with friends and family, there were some folks who were saying, yes, we get this, but why do they, meaning African Americans, keep on wanting to tell their story of slavery? That was such a long time ago. And then are they into being a victim and into victimology? And this came from white friends and colleagues, and also an Asian relative of mine. So there was a kind of an impatience to hearing people tell stories. And at one point, we said, well, there are real victims and real perpetrators in the world. And there are stories there. And then at some point it became, well, what do you know about your own story, victim or otherwise? And we found it was very hard for them to tell stories, you know.
And who's the them you're referring to?
We noticed it was mostly men, yes, white men, but mostly men. We started reflecting on our own experiences in coaching, in teaching, mentoring, my own as a priest, and realizing, well, people don't really know how to tell stories, and men seem particularly ill-disposed. Almost as if there's something in the brain that says, no, don't tell stories of how you might have been hurt or failed. I mean, I'm thinking of one particular executive who told me his up and down stories of a corporate career. And he felt liberated. And I said, that's an amazing story. You've learned so much. Have you shared this with your wife and your daughter? And he hadn't. And I remember going to you to say, what are you, noticing from among your clients? Do they go, they tell us, do they go tell the closest people in their lives the ups and downs of their career? So and he said, no, there was just this kind of blackout. So I started doing some thinking and reflecting. And last year in 2019, the American Psychological Association came out with a report on toxic masculinity, which is masculinity that the values and beliefs of what it means to be a man, a guy, a boy, and how it was actually toxic for men and boys themselves. That when they did a survey, obviously men were in formal leadership positions as CEO and CFOs. By and large, they were there with the levers of power. But they were the ones with the highest rate of suicide, self-inflicted harm, and homicides. They killed each other at a far higher rate than any. And that's because they suppressed emotions, suppressed their feelings. The only visible emotion they could share or display was aggression. Little boys were being acculturated to doing that. Tenderness, other ways to be masculine was not allowed. It was almost immediately tarred as different and bad, as feminine, as gay, as whatever. Kind of a very restrictive way of being, a kind of a stoic way of being. And as we talked about this, we were also concerned, like, why does this matter to us? And it's because we have 6 godchildren, and 5 of them are guys, and 4 of them are white guys. They're in their teens. So the question of the psychological and emotional and spiritual health of our godchildren was in our minds, as well as
many young people that we mentored.
And then many young people that we have mentored, and we started noticing, oh, can they tell their stories? And of course, this is the Facebook age and the Instagram age, where the pressure is to show and display only the good and beautiful story. And so the question becomes, what about a fuller story of yourself?
I want to bring back to what you mentioned earlier, particularly with our white male friends. What makes it so difficult for them to tolerate, to feel, to have the patience to listen to what they call victim stories.
Yeah, other people's victim stories.
And you had a theory to say that, until these white men have access to their own sorrows, their own rage, and be able to express it and have someone listen to them, maybe they don't have the capacity, the availability to listen to others. And so I'm very curious about that. Why is that so?
Yeah. I think, and we're inviting other people to think along with us, that when we are born male, generally, and specifically if you're born white male, you're born into a group in which you are meant to be the ruling class. Now, you may not personally become one of the rulers, masters of the universe. In fact, very few do. But the training program, invisible training program of the culture, is to give you a big opportunity to be in the ruling class. And so you have to follow this program. And the program, first of all, is to fit in, mostly with the other guys, and with your own so-called white group. And to fit in what? It's to fit in order to exercise some form of power. And this stoicism, this containing of emotions, is to make yourself invisible to other people so that you won't be vulnerable, you won't be attacked, people don't know what's going on with you. We were talking to one of our friends, godson her son is our godson, and she was saying she loves how Dee is has a best friend who's a guy, and he's completely in love with his best friend. And then she said, and I know the day will come very soon when he reaches middle school, where he's not allowed to say how much he has a best friend whom he loves who's a guy. And we just started discussing why that's the case, even in this age in which everyone's so woke and they no longer have homophobia. But it's so thick around, now it's time for you, as a boy, to stop showing feelings.
Especially feeling of sadness, of hurt, of pain. Suck it up, swallow it, shut up, don't feel, boys don't cry, kind of.
Yeah, which is across many cultures, but here we're talking of the American culture. Boys don't cry.
I do remember, as you were speaking, an experience for me when I was 14 years old. Came to the U.S. and my father couldn't take care of me, so he sent me to a foster family. And I remember during Christmas, this family, they were opening presents and they were sharing presents with each other. And I felt so sad. But then what I did was I went to the bathroom, I locked the door, I turned on the faucet, I turned on the shower, and I cried so that they couldn't hear me. And I cried and cried. And the moment I remember, I made a promise, I'm going to cry this one time, I will never cry again.
I know.
And I regretted that experience for years, because for years I just couldn't feel certain things. I couldn't feel sad. I couldn't cry. The only time that I could cry is in the dark movie theater is I could cry. But beyond that, in front of anyone, I cannot cry. So years later, I have to spend so much therapy and all kind of work to like, oh, I wish I could cry again.
Yeah, even to yourself.
Even to myself.
Yes.
So in a way, I'm saying this to say that I empathize with people who just have a hard time feeling grief and sorrows, even anger. You know, I don't do anger very well for a long, long time. So I think it's a male thing.
Yes.
But I think to make it even more painful, I think for white male friends, what space do they have to share these stories? And living in the time of identity politics, you know, the moment they open their mouth to say something, then someone would say, check your privilege.
Check your privilege. Yes.
And then they immediately shut down, and
Right.
after a while they just sit there, checked out.
Right.
And who is going to hear their stories?
Yeah.
Of course, then they say, well, you don't want to hear my perpetrator's story, then I'm not going to hear your victim's story.
Yeah.
And so then there's a disconnect.
Yes.
And this is where we are now. This is where I think collectively we lost the ability to tell our own stories, and then we lost the ability to actually have empathy and listening to stories.
Yes.
Now, to make it even worse, I notice that when I tell story to some white friends, what they do is, how are you going to solve this problem? They literally said, Home, you have to
Do ABC.
be rational, be rational. You cannot be emotional. You have to be rational. And I'm like, could I just have a moment to feel my feelings?
Yes.
And so it's very curious to me that I spend actually a lot of time listening, and I get paid a lot of money as a coach and as a guy to listen to people's stories. And I would say I spend my 20s and 30s cultivate and working with people to tell healing stories.
Yeah,
my own
say a bit more.
stories. You know, I came to this country when I was 14 from a war in Vietnam, and when I was 22, I dropped out of college at the horror of my immigrant father. He wanted me to be a doctor, and I said no.
He was a doctor himself.
Yeah, I
right?
wanted to be an artist. He's like, what? And then I start gathering young people, mostly from Vietnam. And I don't know, maybe instinctually, I felt this need, this longing to hear other people's stories and then also tell my own stories to really make meaning of what happened to my father. How did we end up in this country? Why is he working 14, 16 hours a day? Where's my parents? Where's my father? Where is my siblings? Where's my mother? Now, I thought I was the only person who experienced this. Then when we start gathering people to use storytelling, and then we turn these stories into theater performances to share with communities,
Yes.
I realized, wow, I'm not alone.
That's right.
There are other people who are experiencing this sorrow, this pain, this loss, and there's nothing wrong with me. And we get to gather together and cry and cry and cry and laugh together. And we made a play called Laughter from the Children of War. Laughter from the Children of War.
And it toured
Storytelling.
around the U.S.?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we end up performing these, perform this play to many different communities, and we have veterans, Vietnam vets, came up to us, and they said, wow, this is the first time we heard stories from Vietnamese people themselves, and what happened to the children during that time. And by hearing these stories, it also provides them a cathartic healing experience for themselves.
Yes.
And then they ended up reaching out and telling their stories. And so I wonder, why is it so difficult for our white male friends and colleagues and clients, so difficult for them to tell their own stories and also to have empathy for others who are suffering?
Yeah, I think they have empathy, a lot of empathy. It's the impatience with hearing a story told. One is, I think the male impulse is that if I feel empathetic and I can't solve it, then something bad about me, because it's about feeling the male person's own helplessness, since the conditioning to be a male is to
solve problems.
To solve problems, right? And there are many stories that are impossible to solve, particularly if they're about the past. You can go back to the past. And then
and storytelling really not about solving problems.
No, it's about witnessing. And then the other part of it, of course, is that if the story has pain and tragedy, and somehow you or your group is implicated in it, then it's going to raise up all sorts of internal feelings within yourself or within oneself about guilt and shame and conflicted feelings. And the whole training is to not feel. So let's say a little bit more about what this training program is to not feel. When we feel our feelings, we feel and experience the specific nature of our personhood, the uniqueness of our being in this moment. So we fall in love with someone at 12 or 13, and then the person rejects us. The pain is very real and very specific and very visceral and very personal. And then the training is, you get over it. and we've had young people and our godchildren who've had that, and journal message, they internalize this. they should get over it. And you sort of wonder, really? What's going to happen the second time round? So when we start telling our own personal story, if the conditioning is to be male and the conditioning is to be to white, in other words, the conditioning is to show competence, to show winning, to show being in charge, to show popularity, whatever it is to get up there, right? Then it's also about winning and not losing. And if you have feelings or disappointments or uncertainty or hurts, it's just all about saying that you're not there on the ascent. So keep that quiet. And we have noticed this is also a particularly American thing. It seems to happen in middle school in an incredible way to both boys and girls, where there is almost a pyramid to train to be the popular ones, to be in the in crowd, to be cool. I mean, all of the cultures have popularity contests.
But not to the hyper popularity, hyper competition, the way our experience of the U.S. is.
Of the U.S. We have seen this. We became old enough to have a sense of ourselves to notice this was happening and kind of scratch our heads. Plus, it's hard for us to be completely popular because we are not the white guy who plays football. But we notice it among our clients and younger people we have mentored. So popularity sounds benign, but it's actually a training unconsciously to be in the in crowd, right? And then to exert essentially power over others, to exclude. Oh, the other thing that we were saying is this. For most white people, Americans, maybe Europeans, I don't know, before they've ever had a person of color as their friend or their colleague or their teacher or their employee, when that happens, it's much later on in life. They're most likely in college before they have gone outside of their group, demographic, ethnic group. So that it's really their first experience of this competition that may include really difficult and vicious put-downs is white on white. And we do know the male on male can be pretty intense. So then one really starts conforming to a particular ideal.
What's wrong with that? I mean, aren't boys are made to compete? Because if you don't compete, if you don't win, you don't get the girls, you cannot pass on your gene. I mean, this is
Right.
Jordan Peterson's message, right? You better learn how to win.
Yeah. Oh, so the good part of it is it does train you to pass on a particular type of gene and to win. But it's to win in a very narrow slice of life. And that is to win in a game of power, particularly a game of power that is set up in North America, which is mostly winner take all. It doesn't set you up for relationships,
Intimacy,
for intimacy.
long-term friendship.
It doesn't. And there comes the sadness and the depression that takes place in life.
I remember this experience. I was in a workshop and I met this person, this guy. Immediately there's attraction. This is many years ago now. And the first couple of days there's just like palpitating attraction
Yeah.
with each other. And then suddenly, one day it was just like completely cut. He would just avoid me. He would get really standoffish.
Yes.
And I just couldn't figure it out. What's going on? So finally, I got enough courage to say, "Hey, John, what's going on? What is this thing that you're doing?" And he said, "How dare you? How dare you tell me about your life stories? How dare you tell me about your being Vietnamese and coming to this country and who your ancestors are? How dare you? Because I don't even know who my ancestors are. I don't even know where they came from." And I think that was the first moment I just experienced a deep loss for this friend of mine.
Deep loss on his behalf.
On
Yes.
his behalf. And then I realized, wow, he is not alone. There's so many people, particularly white people in America, do not know where they came from, do not know their ancestors. Sometimes they don't even know who their parents are.
Oh, the details of those stories.
Yeah, something get
How they-
repressed, some things became secret. Now, I think I got lucky because I found a way to connect to my own identity as a young person at that time and to do the healing work, because I also got mentorship and a space to tell these stories. So I think the point of this conversation is actually encouraging our white male friends to take courage, to find each other and learn how to tell stories, how to feel into the pain of their lives.
Yes, and have full permission to do that.
Yes, and get together, not to compete with each other, get together not to fix each other and tell what's wrong with you, get over it,
Yes.
you know. But how to cultivate a kind of vulnerability among each other now. I'm saying this, I realize how difficult it is, because one of our friends, the same person, said to me, you know, it's you telling me to be vulnerable, to share my feelings, but my wife and daughters, they would hate to see me fall off the horse, right? They want protection and they want a provider, and they don't, you know, on that sunny day, they said, we want you to be vulnerable, but most days, they just want protection. So why would I open up?
Can I respond to that? So if you don't open up and you don't have a family system in which both men and women, husband and wife, can be full human beings, then you're trying to engage in a play. And that will fall apart when difficulties come.
People get stuck into a
but it
role.
also falls apart when good things happen. So one of the things we do know of the World War II American generation is that when they came back from war, they were supposed to be the victors and to tell the victor's story. But in a war, you know, you could be shitting in your pants and not have fired even a single shot, and come back, or been victors but seen your best friend get shot. But when you come back, you're supposed to only tell the victor's story and the winning story. And so that generation repressed it. And there was just such a high rate of alcoholism. So one of the things that we do want to invite listeners to look at is to reopen and relook at this thing called Stoicism, which was an ethic of the Romans. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome and was a Stoic. And a Stoic was about, being with the tragedies of life and to accept it. the issue is, Marcus Aurelius was already a grown man when he, cultivated this in him. And besides, he also learned this from Epictetus, who was a black slave, who was one of the founders of the Stoic school. We are talking about people who had experienced the full range of emotions and what life had to teach them. And so this containing of the emotion was taking place later in life. It's not something you do when you are young and starting off. You just get into a whole lot of trouble.
So I think you're bringing up a very important topic here around stoicism, the containing of one's emotions. So perhaps in the next episode, we're going to go deeper into the misunderstanding of that practice, and then how do we then cultivate real sense of full being through storytelling. Okay, so this is good enough for now. Please take a breath with us. Thank you for listening.